Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.buzz, and I'm really excited today to welcome to the Innova.buzz podcast from the Silicon Valley in California, the founder of Bay Area Mastermind, Jeremy Shapiro. Jeremy has over 25 years of experience, is passionate about helping fellow entrepreneurs, achieving entrepreneurial freedom, and he does that through structured mastermind groups and coaching. Welcome to the Innova.buzz podcast, Jeremy. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Thanks for inviting me on. I'm excited to be here.
Now, Jeremy, I'm eager to explore the power of mastermind groups with you today and how they can help entrepreneurs uncover blind spots and achieve true entrepreneurial freedom, as I think you put it as one of the expressions. Keen to explore that with you today. To kick things off, tell us a little bit about the impact you aim to make in the world.
Yeah, entrepreneurship has been so, critical for me in my life and for the trajectory it's taken. My entire career has been in entrepreneurship, not just for myself as a serial entrepreneur, but in serving and supporting other entrepreneurs as well. Uh, I've seen firsthand the power of entrepreneurship and how that can help us to find entrepreneurial freedom. And, the more of, the world that can sort of see that light and find a fit for entrepreneurism in their life, I think the better. It's certainly not for everyone, but for the few that entrepreneurship does fit with, it can make a huge, huge difference.
Mm, yeah, it's fascinating. I was reading an article from one of my podcast guest from a few years back this week talking about her entrepreneurial journey. And there were a lot of spanners that were in the works there for her that were beyond her control, personal health issues, among other things. And one of the points made, though, was that a lot of people watch a certain narrative on the online space about entrepreneurism, and they think it's kind of the fancy models on the yacht and basically not having to do any work, just raking in the money on autopilot almost. And she pointed out that it's actually not like that. And the other key point she made, and I think this comes back to your idea of uh, entrepreneurs supporting other entrepreneurs, is that um, it's often we have this vision, that this narrative that's there, and we set ourselves that goal, even though I don't want a yacht. I sort of get seasick on the boat, and yet we set ourselves this target and put ourselves under so much stress. So how do you see that kind of stereotypical narrative, I guess, as a pressure point for people wanting to go down this entrepreneurial journey and putting themselves into this certain straitjacket?
Yeah, I think the story we've heard before about the duck floating effortlessly across the
Yeah.
water, parallels beautifully when most of the world looks at us successful entrepreneurs. They just see the outward signs of what success must mean for having a business and all, right? But what they see is that duck floating
Mm,
across the water. What they don't see are those web feet, swirling and kicking and paddling to make that duck move across the water.
mm,
So first of all, let's be mindful of the nonsense we can see online and what's real versus what's not, right? So that sort of outward advertising. Ask yourself, what is that person? Why are they sharing that, and what are they hoping to do
mm,
by showing you the private jet and the yacht and all that nonsense, right? But then secondly, we've got to ask ourselves, what is our own definition of success, right? You can chase what the rest of the world tells you success looks like, or you can do the hard work and ask yourself what success means to you. Once we figure that out, you can start to craft your business to support that definition of success for you. Otherwise, you're chasing someone else's goalpost. And, just like, Snoopy and Lucy and, Charlie Brown there, you're going to find that it keeps getting, the ball keeps getting moved on you and
mhm.
taken away. And you don't actually end up hitting a goal because you're not the one who's controlling what that goal or narrative is.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's such an important point, and I wish I'd known that when I first started out. But I wish other people looking at the entrepreneurial journey from the outside and saying maybe I want to go down that path would start off with that step of, well, let's find out what does success mean to me and what am I looking for to achieve in my life outside of just the business aspects. What else is involved? Because a lot of people you see that are highly successful in the entrepreneurial space, they make a lot of sacrifices in other parts of their lives. And, you have to ask yourself, do they regret that at some point? And more
Yeah.
importantly, would I regret that at some point making a sacrifice like that? So,
I always enjoy sort of doing boundary check questions, right? Of, picking an extreme and seeing how that plays
mm,
out, right? So, you know, if you're going to follow someone else's definition of success and you feel you've got to have, the next decacorn, $10 billion company, and that's the only definition of success that you have, ask yourself if that meant, working 24 hours a day, not seeing family, pursuing, health and wellness and the rest of these things, like, would that be worth it? And for most folks, they'd realize at that extreme, like, no, that doesn't make
yeah,
sense. Right. Also, you've got to ask, like, is that really how you define success? Is it the valuation of a company? Is it number of employees? Is it, work life quote, quote, balance? Like, what does that success look like? And when we do that hard work and think about what it means, we might realize that we can have a less outwardly sounding successful company that is actually meeting our personal objectives.
mm,
And that's not always about being bigger.
that's right. Yeah. And it's, um, well, it leads into what I've got here as my first bullet point, actually, which we haven't gotten to yet. Often that happens. But yeah, the first bullet point is this concept of entrepreneurial freedom, which you talk about, and I referred
Mm.
to it right at the beginning in the introduction. You talk about it quite a bit. So tell us a little bit more about what that means, because I think this plays into what we've been talking about right now.
Yeah, when I put this term out there, entrepreneurial freedom, I knew what I thought that
Mm.
meant. And what I realized is it was being misunderstood, which is my fault for not explaining it better to the world, right? So when talking about entrepreneurial freedom, some folks thought I was talking about financial freedom. And like, yeah, that can come with, the right business and entrepreneurial freedom. But entrepreneurial freedom isn't about, sitting on a beach, sipping drinks with umbrellas on top for the rest of your life, and being all set in that way. I don't think any of us business owners have any dreams of sitting on a
Mm.
beach like that, right? So when I talk about entrepreneurial freedom, it's really about optionality, freedom of choice in how you spend your time. For many of us, we reinvest that time into our business or in launching new businesses. Many of us spend that newfound time with family, pursuing hobbies, interests, giving back in our community, and so on. And many of us continue doing work in the business, but we're more selective about how we spend that
Mm.
time. So imagine working with only, the most interesting
Yeah.
clients that were really fulfilling to you, right? Or imagine just doing the one part of the business that you love doing and not worrying about the rest of it, right? When you have entrepreneurial freedom, you have that freedom of choice in terms of how you spend your time and what it is that your business does.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really important point, that idea of choice and having choice. And one of the things I think, and I've sort of been learning this over the time, and every time I face a choice where I think I need to move off something or I need to say no to something, I sort of reflect back on this idea of where I've gotten to the point where I was forced to basically make a choice, and I pick something, and I'm worried about, okay, I'm going to lose something here, but at the end of the day, after having made the choice, all of a sudden, oh, that's That's freed me up from the stress of a difficult client. It's freed me up
Yeah.
from the time pressures of having to do 50 projects in inside of 1 week, or it's freed me up from something else, and all of a sudden, oh, wow, I can take on something that I really enjoy. I can take on a client that I really enjoy rather than these clients that are ringing me up every half hour to see where things are at.
You touched on two really interesting things there, right? One of them is, if we look at the word decide, what I find really interesting is like the Latin root behind the word decide is desire, which means to cut off.
Hmm,
So deciding is less about choosing what you are going to do and more about all the things you're consciously saying no to. When you choose, the right path A, you were saying no to path B, C, D, and
hmm,
E, right? So that's one of the reasons that freedom comes from deciding and making a decision and taking action moving forward, right? It's because you now aren't burdened by that choice of what other paths to take. You've committed to one, right? So that's really powerful.
yeah. I guess one of the things I'm curious about your view on, And this is something that a lot of people struggle with when they first come to this realization that we've got too much on our plate. And how do I manage this all? Well, the easy answer is take something off the plate. So, but how do you say no to somebody in a way that doesn't burn bridges, that doesn't impact negatively on relationships, that is elegant and professional, I guess?
Yeah. So a really helpful strategy, whether it's, an interpersonal relationship, an employee, a client, whatever it is, when it's not about the two of you, but about something else, the conversation is way easier. When it's the two of you on the same side of the table
Mm,
talking about that third thing, you are collaborating. So let me share with you what that means, in practice. When you understand, the definition of success, or what the mission, vision, purpose, and values are, your conversations can all be had in that framework.
mm,
So a common mistake I see business owners make as they're growing the team and hiring is they'll just hire a person because they need a warm body to help out in
yeah.
the company, right? But there's not a clear job description. There's not a clear system. There's not a clear definition of success. And so you have a team member who legitimately wants to do a good job. And now they're failing in doing that in your mind.
Mm,
But you've also not communicated ahead of time what success looks like. So they think they're doing fine. You think they're not. And now it feels like this, antagonistic, person against person conversation. Well, if you had a clear definition of success up front during the interview and hiring process, during training, onboarding, and so on, now when you're having a coaching conversation, the two of you are talking about the system that's being used
mm,
and looking at what's wrong with the system or the process and what do we need to do to meet that definition of success that you both had agreed on. When you know what the mission, vision, and purpose is for you, for your company, and so on, when you're having a conversation with someone, perhaps a client, and the project doesn't align with that, you can lovingly turn that down because that's not congruent to the values and the mission and the vision and the purpose you have. So you're not turning that person down
mm,
or that project down. You're merely reminding that there's a path that you are on, and this just isn't part of that path. And that's okay. It's not their fault or yours.
yeah. Yeah, I find, personally, I find, I guess, turning an opportunity from a client down a little easier because the way I normally do it is I will say, look, I don't have the bandwidth with that right now, and my focus is in this area, not this where you're looking for assistance. But I do know people that operate in that space, that are
Yeah.
experts in that space, and that I trust implicitly and I can recommend to you. And that way.
Well, this is like for earlier stage business owners, who don't understand niching just
Mm,
yet, right? Or niching for some of our
yeah, yeah.
listeners. So the idea is that, the tighter your niche is of the market that you serve, the more elevated you can become within that niche, the more you're worth, but the more other business you might be saying no to,
Mm,
right? So you think about if you're having, heart troubles, do you want to go to the veterinarian slash
yeah,
dentist slash general family practitioner? Or do you want to go to like the cardiac heart
yeah.
surgeon? Right? You want the specialist who's taking care of the thing that you need. And your prospects are the same way. Do they want to go to you because you are the expert in their exact avatar or because you're a generalist who will take care of anyone? I was talking with a realtor the other day, and I was asking about his niche, who he serves, buyers, sellers, markets, what kind of home, all these different things. And I was getting that response you never want to hear, which is like, oh, look, I'll take care of
Yeah,
anyone.
yeah, yeah.
Any of these markets, buying, selling, all this. And like what that immediately told me is this guy has no idea who he really can help out. And if he's willing to take anyone, then maybe he shouldn't be taking anyone I might refer over.
Mm. Yes, that's something that many people really struggle with, and I always
Yeah.
point out that the clearer you are about your niche, about who your ideal client is, the clearer you'll be able to recognize them. And I've had experiences where I've overheard conversations behind me, of a couple of people, and I've immediately said, that person's an ideal client. And I've introduced myself and I said I couldn't help overhearing. And it ended up in business because there
Right.
was a natural fit. And it was because I was so clear on my ideal client that when I heard a couple of the tell signs, okay, there it is. The other
Yeah.
thing I point out is, well, the clearer you are, the more likely you are to recognize the opportunities that are a really good fit for you. The other thing I point
Mhm.
out, though, and this comes back to the optionality, there's no reason you can't, if somebody comes along and they're not here in the niche, they're over here, there's no reason you can't choose to work with them for a good reason. It's,
If you
yeah,
want to, because it
it's
supports
not a
that mission.
rule that says, no, you can't
Right.
work with that person.
But it lets you tailor all of your marketing,
Exactly.
right? It
Yep.
lets you speak to that exact avatar, right? So, like, there's so much value in dialing your niche in really, really tight. The reason new business owners typically don't or won't do it or are afraid of doing it comes down to this whole FOMO,
Mm.
right? There's the fear that if they say they only work with a certain, certain kind of business or a certain kind of client, that they're going to lose business. And the reality is that you typically gain more business
Mm.
and can command a higher value and a higher price by having a specialty.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a couple of times in my business where I've made a bit of a pivot, but the pivot's been more about, okay, I need to tighten the niche. I need to be really more focused in this area, and I'm not enjoying this bit. I'm not enjoying that bit, or this bit really, I don't have the time to keep up to date with what's going on here, and so I'm probably not as expert as I am in this area. And if I continue to
Yeah.
focus to be the expert in this area, well, I don't have time to keep up to date or catch up in that. And so I the pivots were always about tightening my niche, tightening my message, tightening the ideal client avatar. And every time I did that in a substantial way where yeah, the conventional thinking would have been, okay, I'm going to take a hit here until I kind of recover. It's going to be business is going to do that and then I'll recover and hopefully I'll be better off in the long term. Well, no, what actually happened was there was the dip, but within about 2 weeks, I sort of picked up a couple of fairly significant projects that were right in my niche simply
Mhm.
because I'd made that pivot, I'd recognized opportunities, and I'd refocused my marketing specifically with that message.
Yeah. If you want to, for our listeners who have like word of mouth referral based businesses, if you want to be able to get more referrals, the tighter your niche, the easier it is for people to refer you really good, warm clients, right? If you are doing any sort of, marketing, which hopefully most of our listeners are doing, it is far easier to write to a very specific avatar of your ideal client than it is to write to the world at
Mm,
large.
yep, very important point. All right, Jeremy, now you talked about referrals there, and that kind of prompted me to remember your business is all about masterminds, and I'm sure referrals are part of a mastermind group. So tell us a little bit more about the power of mastermind. How did you get started in developing this mastermind group or groups, and yeah, the value of them?
Yeah, so the whole idea of like a mastermind goes back to Napoleon Hill and his one of the most famous books, Think and Grow Rich, that came out in the
Mm,
30s. So almost 100 years
yeah.
ago, this idea was documented and shared with the world of a mastermind. And the idea is that if you get two or more people together in the same room at the same time, working in harmony towards a common goal, you have the creation of this third mastermind, right? I compare this to if you imagine the last time you're trying to solve a problem or brainstorm something on your own versus with someone else. As you're sort of developing this idea in improving and riffing off of other people, the ideas you come up with together is not just like the sum of if you two both worked, in a quiet room on your own and then just shared your ideas. It's a whole different outcome by working together, right? So let's fast forward to modern day. What does that mean? Well, at the Bay Area Mastermind, we get business owners together for a full day once a month to work on their business in these peer advisory groups. And so these are other like minded, growth focused entrepreneurs who have established scaling businesses, and we're there to truly support each other. Now, what's cool is while everyone's on that same journey, that same entrepreneurial journey, right? Everyone's seeing success in different ways.
Mm,
So you have some folks who, for example, are excellent marketers, but maybe their operations aren't so great. You have other people with outstanding systems, but like their sales process is terrible. You have some people who use direct mail, others who have brick and mortar stores, others who do email marketing and so on, right? So everyone has different superpowers and have things contributing towards their success, and holding them back from growing. And so by getting folks together in the room, as someone shares a challenge of what's blocking them and, making them get stuck in business, others have been there before and can help them to get unblocked. And as people are there sharing their successes and their wins, they can be celebrated by those who get it, who understand that they're not just the duck smoothly moving across the
Mm.
water. They've seen the challenges that it took to get to that success and can truly celebrate you and, have that camaraderie with you. Because like as an entrepreneur, as you and I know, it can be lonely at
Yeah.
the top. There's not that many folks you can share those wins with or truly share those real challenges we have going on in business.
Mm. Yeah, I love that concept of sharing the wins as well, because one of the things that most entrepreneurs are not that good at, certainly I struggle with it all the time and have to hold myself back and remind myself is, okay, goal achieved or project completed or whatever the outcome is achieved, and I go tick. Okay, what's next? Don't take time to celebrate.
Yeah.
What?
I got the nickname decades ago of Jeremy Check the Box Shapiro because when I take notes in the margin, if it was an action item, I'd draw a little tick box, a little square. And that would mean I'd have to come back at some point and check that box. And so, as successful entrepreneurs, we're not just visionaries. We don't just have ideas. We also are able to execute because the best ideas in the world don't amount to much until you do something with it. Right. So as continuous implementers and executors, we lose track of all that got done because what we see in front of us is the mountain of to-dos and all the things that still need to get done. So it's important to actually take stock and acknowledge what's actually been accomplished. So one of the things we do before we kick off each of our mastermind meetings is we go around the room and do a rose, bud, thorn, right? So we talk about a rose, what's a really big win or accomplishment from the past month? A bud, what's one thing that you're working on that's sort of in process, right? And an optional thorn, what's sort of one big challenge you've been facing? And that's just sort of a lightning round that sets the tone for the day, right? So we sort of know where everyone's at with sort of one quick item. And then the bulk of the day is actually spent in these hot seats where we deep dive into each person's business, talking about what's really going on over the past month, right? And what I think's so cool about this is when people come into the room, they're usually bringing in, two things in their mind or two categories of knowledge, right? One is their expertise, their superpower, the stuff that's working really well that they're really good at, right? We all have some category like this in our business and life, right? So that's the stuff that you know that you know. The second thing that's brought in is usually the big question you have, the thing that's been keeping you up at night, this area you're feeling stuck. And this is the thing you know that you don't know. But when you know that you don't know something, you can like search online for answers. You can read books, take courses, seek out mentors, right? You can look for answers to your questions. And that's usually when people find me and, attend our mastermind test drive. But the real value, when I see the most notes and the biggest aha moments throughout the day, is actually the third biggest category. And those are the things that you didn't know you didn't know. And how else do you get exposure to the things you didn't know than by going behind closed doors and hearing others on the same journey as you are, sharing what's working, what's not, right? Where they're getting stuck and what's really going on. This is where the real resources are shared. It's not a one-way presentation, it's a conversation. So when someone's sharing a product launch they just did and how it went really well, you get to like ask questions and peel back the layer on things and have that conversation. That's not something you ever get to do in a course or in a book or in any other format. You are behind closed doors with your like virtual laboratory of scientists studying the game of business, right? Experimenting and finding things that don't work and finding things that do. And you get the benefit of all that knowledge. And that's how you get the exposure to those game-changing pivots. That's where new businesses are launched, new products are created, new sales channels are added, all from other people sharing what's really going on behind the closed doors of their business.
Yeah, I really love that hot seat concept. The other thing you didn't mention there, you alluded to it a little bit, but I've found in times when I've been in that situation where I've been in the hot seat and you come away with a heap of ideas as the person in the hot seat from
Oh
those
yeah.
questions that people ask, or of course, there will be people that are saying, well, you mentioned this challenge. Here's an idea I have how you might approach that.
Yeah. Well, you're getting a peer group, and experts in the room to help guide you and answer your question. You ask one question, you're getting some expert answers in an interactive format,
Mm.
right? But even more powerfully is you're getting people to ask you the tough questions, call you on your BS, expose your blind spots, and do the thing that nobody is typically willing to do to the boss,
Yeah.
right? As an entrepreneur at the top, who calls you out on your blind
Mm.
spots and lets you know when you might be wrong or tells you about a pitfall coming up you might not see coming, right? When you're in that peer advisor group, remember, these aren't your employees, these
Yeah.
aren't your investors, right? These aren't your, this isn't your family, your friends, right? These are other business owners on this journey who have no stake in your business. They want just what's best for you, right? So they can share with you, ways to be more successful with what you're doing, to get unstuck, and can help you avoid some of those dangers that might be up ahead that you might not even be aware of.
Yeah, that's great. Now you mentioned there's a full day meeting once a month. How do you keep the momentum between that time? Because some
Yeah.
of these groups that I've been in where there was a once a month meeting, everybody leaves at the end of that. There's a high level of excitement, but often the next day people get stuck in the weeds of everyday activities that need to be done. And then before,
It sounds like you're saying entrepreneurs have lots of ideas, but then they get
yeah,
distracted.
yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and then before you know
Yeah.
it, a month's over and you're back in the same room, and it's like, okay, what were
Yep.
your wins this month? Well, pretty much the same as last month. What were your challenges
Oh,
this month?
no.
Oh, pretty much the same as last month.
Yeah. Well, what you're touching on there is accountability, and that is so, so important, in a good mastermind group. If you have people coming back month after month, and it's the same problem, and they're not actually executing on their ideas, they might not be a good fit for the
Yeah,
group, right? You need to make sure you have folks who are willing to be held accountable, right? And are willing to get done what they say they're gonna get done. So, one of the things we do in our group is at the end of each hot seat, we recap down what the action items are that that person is committing to doing over the next month. That's documented. That's then shared out to the group after the meeting. We have an internal email list we use, for group members as well as private Slack channels, right? And so we communicate those in those different forums, right? Now everyone knows what you're being held accountable
mm,
to. We check in a few times during the month as well to see how you're doing on your accountability items. This is your chance, not just, from those messages, but between now and then to update the group on what you're getting done, right? Update the group on where you're getting stuck, ask for questions, get early feedback. You don't have to wait the whole
yeah,
month, right? So if you've said, you're going to get the sales page online for this upcoming product launch, you don't have to wait a whole month. 3 days later, you can email that to the group and ask for feedback
mm,
right then and there, right? So that way, by the time you get to the meeting, it's launched, it's gotten results, and you can now report back what really happened with that launch.
mm. Yeah. I think that's hugely valuable. I mean, I know I find that not only helpful to like let's take that example of the sales page. I write up the sales page after having gotten a lot of feedback in that hot seat situation. I then write up the sales page and post something online. Uh, it's immensely helpful to then get feedback and say, yes, that's exactly what I meant, or no, if you tweak this, it'll work better, or whatever. Uh, but also hugely motivational because now all of a sudden I'm getting a level of engagement with that peer group, whether they tell me it's
Yeah.
fantastic, you did a fantastic job, or whether they tell me these things these things should be different for it to work better based on my experience. Obviously, that's what they're basing it on.
Yeah.
But it's still
What
really motivational for me personally.
Yeah, so it can be very motivational to share what you're working on and get that positive feedback, that kudos, as well as the, constructive
Mm,
criticism. Where I find folks often use it most is when they're stepping out of their comfort zone. They're stepping into the unknown for them, right? So, an example would be you have someone hiring for a role they haven't hired for before, right? So, we've had folks who, for example, are hiring, a marketing person for the company and they haven't done it before. So they'll share with the group like, "Hey, here's the job posting or here's the job offer or whatever. Like, is this on track?" And people who've hired for that role before can provide that early feedback,
mm,
right? And help to revise that before it's seen more publicly, right? Same thing if are launching a new kind of product, right? If you traditionally have a product-based business and you haven't had a service offering, you put out there the idea of what you're launching, and people who have experience with that kind of
mm,
product have earlier feedback. So when you get out of that comfort zone, which is where all the real growth happens, right? You're not going at it alone. right? You're heading up that mountain with a few guides who've been there before and who know it and who can help you out because they have that experience and can help you to see success as well without having to learn the hard way like they did
Yeah.
many times
Yeah.
over.
Well, where I always struggled also was, and you mentioned different product type, but pricing. Pricing.
Yeah.
How do you price a product or a service based on value? And I mean, way back in my corporate career, it was often a case of these are the costs. These are what we have to write off in equipment against that product or service. And this is the profit margin that we're looking for. And so then you work out the price. And I was always curious even then, and though I didn't understand much about pricing, but it always struck me as, well, what if people don't pay that? And so
Yeah.
since I've been in the entrepreneurial game, I've learned that, well, the first thing you probably want to ask is, what are people prepared to pay for this thing? How valuable is the service in terms of the cost of the problem that they're trying to solve? And that, of course, is a very hard thing to get to without doing extensive customer surveys or benchmarking against existing products, which if you're going out and doing something very innovative is harder to do. So getting
Mhm.
some peer feedback there, or even in designing a survey like that you might take to customers, that can be really helpful to run by the mastermind group as well.
So it's funny. I've seen again and again new businesses get launched from conversations in the
Mm.
mastermind. Even speaking firsthand, I was in a high end destination mastermind group. This is one of those groups where you like write a 5 to 6 figure check once a year just to be in the room 2 or 3 times a year. And at the time, I hadn't written a check that size to be in that kind of group before. And I remember holding onto that check and being really uncomfortable as the person who ran the group was holding the other side of the check, not wanting to let go. And some promises were made to me of what I would get from that group. And the reality is I never actually got what it was I was told I would get from that group. What I got, however, was far more valuable. Not just the clients, not just the lifelong friendships and, business comrades as it were, but from conversations in that room, I had an idea for a new business. And right in that room, I got really, really quick product market fit research completed and found out that I had prospective customers in that room.
Mm.
And so very quickly, I was able to prototype this business I wanted to launch, had my initial beta customers willing to test it out and use it in their business. And when we then turned around, having used their rapid iterative feedback on our MVP and launched the product more publicly, we had paying customers from day one, right? That is a multi-million dollar business that came from just some conversations and back of the envelope doodle in a mastermind room.
Mm.
And I wish I could say that was I'm glad I'm not saying that's a one-time thing because the reality is I've seen that kind of thing happen again and again. From a conversation in the room turns into a quick sketch of a business plan, turns into an MVP and a whole new business, grows from there, eclipsing the original business the person came into the room with.
Yeah, that's a very powerful example, and I've certainly seen examples of that happening in our community as well, in the podcast community. Whereas that that is not what I set up the community to do, but it simply came about when people get together and have conversations and start to share their problems and opportunities and ask for feedback on ideas that can happen. Mm.
Yeah. It's powerful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So thinking about mastermind groups and what you've set up, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot you've learnt, and I'm sure it's evolved from the time you started those groups. What would you do different today, or what kind of rules would you set up to revolutionize groups that are around that maybe aren't doing as well as yours?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I like how you phrase that. So one of the core values we have is Kaizen, right? It's this idea of continuous never ending
Mm.
improvement, right? So in business, I think sometimes we like to think of things as being set in stone and it just being the way it's going to be forever. I look at things as a little more malleable. And, within the game of business, we're constantly experimenting and looking to improve. So over the years, I've seen our format, evolve and change, as we've tried out new things with the group. Some work really well and we keep, and others don't provide as much value, or don't stick as much. And that's okay. But it's definitely worth trying. So we've experimented a ton over the years. And I encourage our listeners to do that same thing in your business. Whatever it is you hold holy, ask yourself, well, what could a variation be? What if we did start things over and try things differently? And find a way of, MVPing, minimum viable product testing, your idea and testing your hypothesis, right? It might be your hypothesis is wrong and we learn from that, and that's okay. It validates what you're currently doing, right? Or it could be that your hypothesis was right and there actually is a better way of doing the thing that you've always been doing, right? So what a few of the things we've learned over the years that work really well. One is the meeting cadence. There are certainly groups that meet like weekly, which I find is far too frequent. There's not enough time to truly evolve things in your business over the course of 7 days. So I find that too frequent. You also don't typically get enough time to deep dive into a business if you're meeting for like 30 to 60 minutes once a week. So that format, that cadence and meeting length, I find does not work very well. On the flip side, the destination groups, I've been parts of those, and you're hopping on a plane a few times a year, maybe 2 or 3 times, and you've got time away from the family and the office and everything else, for each one of these to meet for a few days. And those meetings can be really, really valuable. But with a meeting frequency of 2 or 3 times a
Mm.
year, if you miss one meeting because of a conference, a wedding, a vacation,
Yeah.
a life, whatever, you might be 9 months between meetings, right? You might be showing up with a completely different business than what you had the last time you were there. And so sort of that continuity between meetings is really lost amongst the members. So, I've found the cadence and frequency and meeting length of once a month for a full day is really, really valuable. I find that that's spot on. The second thing, that I find is really important to figure out is, we're talking about niche before, right? Like, who is it that you want in the room? Masterminds work when you have like-minded individuals pursuing, a common goal, right? So, if you don't have that, you're not going to have as effective as a mastermind. Now, on the other extreme, if you have all of like the exact same kind of person, there's also not as much value. So the diversity I look for in the room is different business models and business types, different superpowers, like what people are really good at, and different industries. But the commonalities I'm looking for are lifelong learners, right? Business owners that have an existing post-revenue business, right, with a proven sales process that are scaling and feeling stuck, right? Because if you got something that's working, we can iteratively improve
Mm.
that. That's a very different conversation than, for example, our founders groups, right? With our founders, we're talking about much earlier stage, right? These are folks who are looking for a co-founder, who are looking to develop an idea, who want to know how to get started, right? Also valuable, but two very
Definitely.
different
Yeah.
audiences with very little, overlap, right? So knowing your niche. It's really important for me also demographically that we're finding folks who are willing to be held accountable, who are willing to, ask tough questions and also be asked tough questions. This is part of the reason we do a mastermind test drive is we want to see what someone's like to be with behind closed
Mm.
doors for a full day, right? If we see they're engaging and they're asking questions and they're helping other members out and they're giving and receiving value, that's the making of a really good member,
Mm.
right? If it's someone who doesn't want to speak up at all or, doesn't take questions or criticism well,
Yeah.
those
Like,
are
yeah.
sort of red flags that we look out for.
Mm.
So figure out what your niche is and who would make a really good person for the room you want to create. Or, as you're seeking out a group to join, make sure it's going to be, the right kind of folks in that room that you can provide value to and receive tremendous value from.
Mm. Yeah. Lots of really good points there, and many many things to consider. The one thing I'm curious about, I guess, in you building your groups, I guess if there's an established group and you're bringing a new member on, you have a trial period, or you say come and come to one meeting and see what you think, and then you have a conversation whether they see value in it and whether you think they're a good fit. and make a decision based on that, I suppose. But what about if you're, and correct me if I'm wrong there, but what about if you're starting a new group? How do you go about that?
Yeah. So, first off, you're spot on. That's exactly our process for folks looking to, join an existing group is we're looking for that fit. So you have a mastermind test drive day with us. So you join us for the day and get to participate fully. And then afterwards we have a conversation and we look for feedback from the group. Do they think that you're a fit? And, our conversation is, do you think the group's a fit for you? Right. Now, putting a new group together, that's a different story entirely. Right. You still have an idea of, niche wise, what you're looking to create there, and you want to make sure you have you do have the right folks, right? So for our listeners who are looking at, kicking off a group, know what your criteria is, know what your niche is, be super upfront about that, right? That'll help you to attract the
Mm,
right prospective member and will repel the wrong
yeah,
prospective member. It's
but
almost more
defining your
important in our
niche
marketing
again,
and
right?
communication. Yeah. You want to make sure you're repelling the
Yeah.
wrong, the wrong avatar as much as you're attracting the right one.
Mm. Excellent. All right. Well, we could go on talking masterminds and entrepreneurship for ages, but I'm just aware of the time moving on there, Jeremy. So I think it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round. It's the same 5 questions I ask of every guest, and the idea is you'll give us some insightful answers that will inspire the listener to go and take some action as a result today. We already talked
Love
about
it.
taking action, ticking the boxes. All right. What's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
Uh, Seek feedback from, outside yourself. Don't go at it
Mm.
alone. Surround yourself with like-minded individuals. That is where a lot of creativity comes from, is that riffing off of each other.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. And we've alluded to that before, and you told a couple of stories where, um, we can have an idea, and when we share that idea, then that can spark, or the conversation that comes about can spark further ideas, or refine that idea, or even sometimes say, "Well, I've just thought of something completely different."
The number of ideas I've had that have gotten ruled out by a few quick conversations early
Yeah,
on is astounding. But boy, am I lucky I was able to have those conversations
yeah,
early
that's right.
than,
Not in,
launching a whole business
yeah,
that, what was
not
destined to
invest
fail.
a lot of time and money. Yeah. All right. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
So, I love keeping track of those harebrained ideas us entrepreneurs always have, and then going back, refining them, creating that super short business plan and figuring out what the MVP is, and quickly starting to shop that around, right? And doing that early market research can help you refine, pivot, or trash an idea.
Hmm. Yeah, excellent. I love it. Keeping track of the ideas you have, and I, I try to do this because I have lots of ideas. And I try to write them down as soon as, or record them on my watch if I'm out on the bicycle or somewhere like that, which you can relate to. But yeah, then following up and keeping tabs of that and saying, okay, what am I going to do with this? Is it just something to park for now, or do I take action and move it forward? Mm.
Yeah. Us entrepreneurs have no shortage of
Yeah.
ideas. What it comes down to is, again,
Choice,
deciding,
yes.
which ones we're going to
Yeah.
pursue.
All right. Do you have a favorite resource you use most often?
Resource broadly, my goodness, yeah, I mean, it probably sounds overplayed now, but,
Yeah,
mastermind groups
yeah.
have been so powerful for me to refine those ideas, get the input and feedback, more than any other sort of static one-way book or course or thing like that. That's been such a powerful
Mm,
resource.
excellent. All right. And we'll have links later on to your mastermind groups. But let's move on to the next one in the buzz round. What's the best way to keep a project or a client on track?
Accountability is
Yeah.
huge, right? One of the challenges for us entrepreneurs is, like, no one really holds us accountable but
Mm,
ourselves. So the more you have real world accountability, the better. So whether if it's a client that you've committed to getting something done by a certain deadline for, that's great. If it's a peer group you have accountability with, if it's a friend who you've agreed to meet up with at a certain place to get something done is huge. But give yourself artificial
mm.
accountability if you don't have the real accountability, because that can help you to get things done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so important because, um, yeah, I've started doing some things in some of the activities that I'm doing now, some of my financial investing opportunities I'm doing, and I'm sort of taking lots of risks. And I've started, and my wife's got to the point now of saying every week when I tell her, "Here's what I did this week, and here's the outcome, and these are the mistakes I made, and these are the decisions that I'm pleased I made." And so, you don't need to tell me every week. And I says, "Yes, I do, because that's my
Yeah.
way of keeping myself accountable." And
Yeah.
she says, "Well," and then she'll say, like this week, I made a mistake that cost me some money, and she said, "Oh," and I said, "But at the end of the day, I made that money back and more." And she said, "Well, that's good." And I said, "No, I'm annoyed because I made the mistake." And I said, and I've got to learn from that. And so that's why I'm telling you.
Yeah. So long as you learn from it is
Yeah,
huge. I'm sure you can relate to this. In the cycling world, I found like when I have an event on the calendar, when I have a race or a ride or something big coming up, all the training lines up to make that a
yeah.
success. But when I have those times between an event being on the
Mm,
calendar, there's less of a bigger uh, goal you're working towards, and so the training happens, but it's not as focused or
that's
dialed
right.
in.
Yeah.
So the same I find applies in business and life, whatever else it is. When you're working on something towards something, right? You can have the accountability, all the things it takes to get lined up to make that happen. But if you are changing your focus and you haven't really defined success and you're sort of just getting back into the fire of it every single day, then you're going to look back a month later and not much will really move forward. You'll have been
Mm,
busy, but you won't have been productive. So figure out what success
yeah,
is, figure out what that goal is, and everything else can line up to support that.
that's right. And measuring things is very powerful. And then having a plan to achieve it also, which is the training
Yeah.
program.
Right?
All right. Final question of the buzz round. What's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Oh my gosh, it's almost like you had that niche seed planted earlier. Yeah, differentiation is really about niching, right? When you say what it is you do stand for and you have your mission, vision, purpose figured out, when you know what those values are, when you know who your customer is dialed down with 20 demographic points, right? You are now separating yourself out from everyone else who wants to sell to, a human, that can fog a
Hmm,
mirror, right? You knowing who your avatar is can be the absolute, king or queen or whatever it is of that niche. And you don't need a very big addressable market to have an extremely successful business if you are the leader in that niche space.
yeah, yeah, wonderful. That's pretty clear. And as I said earlier, the tighter you niche down, every time I've done that exercise, the more business I actually end up getting. Um,
Yeah. We,
which,
we have an exercise we do, from time to time in the mastermind when someone doesn't have their avatar
yeah,
dialed in to help them really define super niche who that avatar is. And it can be uncomfortable because you think you know who your target market is, and then you realize some of the questions that are asked, and you suddenly come to terms with the fact that you don't have it defined as well as you could.
hmm, excellent. All right. Well, thanks for getting us through the buzz round, Jeremy. Now, and thanks for the conversation so far. It's been really fabulous. Where can people find out more about you, the work you do, about Bay City Mastermind, and maybe even get in touch and say thanks for what you've shared with us today?
Yeah, you can do all that and more at bayareamastermind.com. That's BAYAREA mastermind.com.
Excellent. All right. And as I said, we'll have that link in the show notes, so make it really easy for people to click through. So, as we wrap it up, Jeremy, what action would you like our listener to take out of our conversation today?
Remember, as an entrepreneur, others have been on this journey before and are on this journey right now and will be on this journey in the future to come, right? You're not alone on this. You don't have to go at it alone. You can succeed with the knowledge of others. Seek others out who are also on this entrepreneurial journey. Surround yourself with them, celebrate with them, share those challenges, help them along their way. And you might find that you get more help than you ever imagined you could have, on your journey as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent, excellent point. And also, you mentioned there'll be people taking the journey um, that are starting out the journey where you might be well down the track, looking for opportunities to help others. I find also you can learn so much there, as well as the generosity of giving back. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. We have our mastermind members occasionally drop in to our founders group meetings as mentors,
Yeah.
right? They're there to, help folks who are getting
Mm.
started. And it's rewarding for them,
Yeah.
right? Because suddenly they're the big expert in the room, having a successful scaling business, and being able to give back and help out, folks who are, earlier on in that journey. And it's wonderful to see that.
Mhm. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us today, Jeremy. I've really enjoyed the conversation and had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
Likewise, thank you for inviting me
yeah,
on. This has been
all
great.
the best for the future. And please do stay in touch.
Absolutely.